I never imagined my own restaurant would become the stage for such unexpected drama. Harvest Table was my pride and joy, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. The warm, rustic space with just 15 tables had become my refuge, my purpose. When my stepmother Sandra called asking for a table for 8, something felt off. Our relationship had been strained since my father passed 5 years ago, leaving me with little but my determination. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from, hit that like and subscribe button, and let us begin this wild journey together. I opened Harvest Table 2 years ago at the age of 32, fulfilling a dream I had nurtured since childhood. Working as a chef under my demanding stepfather taught me both culinary skills and resilience. For 10 long years, I saved every penny, worked double shifts, and learned everything I could about running a restaurant. Harvest Table is small but special, with just 15 tables arranged in a cozy, intimate setting. We focus on locally sourced ingredients and sustainable practices, creating dishes that honor tradition, while adding my own creative touch. The business generates just enough to keep us afloat, but we have been slowly building a loyal customer base who appreciate our approach to food and service. Most nights we fill about 70% of our capacity, and weekends are becoming consistently booked. The reviews have been positive, and several local food bloggers have featured us in their recommendations. Each small success feels like validation for the countless sacrifices made along the way. My relationship with Sandra has always been complicated. My father met her at a charity gala, and they married after just 6 months of dating. She was 20 years his junior, beautiful and charming in public, but cold and dismissive in private, especially toward me. They were married for 3 years before my father died suddenly of a heart attack at 58. The loss devastated me, but Sandra seemed more concerned with her inheritance than her grief. The will left nearly everything to Sandra, including the family home and his investments. I received only a small inheritance from my grandmother, which I had carefully saved to fund my restaurant dream. Sandra never approved of my career choice, considering the restaurant industry beneath her social aspirations. She preferred the company of wealthy socialites and viewed my culinary ambitions as embarrassing. Even after I moved out, she would make cutting remarks about my choices whenever we had the misfortune of crossing paths at family events. My life now revolves completely around Harvest Table. I work over 70 hours each week, living in the small apartment above the restaurant to save on rent and remain close to my business. My team has become something of a family to me. Madison, my head waitress, has been with me since opening day. She is efficient, friendly, and incredibly loyal. Carlos joined 6 months later as my sous chef, bringing his incredible talent for sauces and presentation. Jake manages the front-of-house operations, handling reservations, and making sure everything runs smoothly. The restaurant means everything to me. It represents not just my livelihood, but my identity and purpose. Every positive review, every returning customer, every compliment on a dish feels like personal validation. But running a small independent restaurant is never easy. We struggle with bills, equipment repairs, and the bank loan I took out to get started. We need about 3 more months of strong business to finally reach stable financial ground. That Tuesday morning began like any other. I arrived at 5:30 in the morning to accept deliveries from local farmers and prepare for the day ahead. Carlos came in at 7, and we spent the morning prepping sauces, chopping vegetables, and marinating proteins. Jake arrived at 10 to handle administrative tasks and prepare for lunch service. Everything was proceeding normally until my phone rang just after 11. Seeing Sandra's name on the caller ID was unexpected enough to make me pause. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was artificially sweet as she requested a table for 8 people that evening at 7. We were already fully booked, a rare occurrence for a Tuesday, and I began to explain this. She cut me off, insisting this was important. The guests were a group of her wealthy, influential friends, including Thomas Wilson, a prominent real estate developer, and his wife Jessica. Sandra emphasized repeatedly how much influence these people had and how they could help promote my quaint little restaurant. Against my better judgment, I agreed to accommodate her party. This meant rearranging several existing reservations and creating a makeshift large table in the center of the dining room. Jake looked concerned when I told him about the changes. He reminded me of Sandra's past behavior and suggested we might be inviting trouble. I assured him it would be fine, that perhaps this was Sandra's way of extending an olive branch. In retrospect, his instincts were far more accurate than my naive optimism. Sandra and her entourage finally arrived at 7:45, almost an hour late for their reservation. During that time, I had turned away several walk-in customers and dealt with the frustration of other diners whose tables had been rearranged. The group swept into the restaurant like they owned the place, their voices loud and their presence immediately dominating the intimate space. Sandra led the pack, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Behind her came Thomas Wilson, a tall, imposing man in his 50s with silver hair and a perpetual look of evaluation in his eyes. His wife Jessica, at least 15 years, his junior, clung to his arm, her diamond bracelets catching the light with every gesture. Diana Miller, a fashion designer Sandra had often name-dropped, surveyed the restaurant with poorly disguised disdain. The remaining guests included Robert Evans, a lawyer known for representing luxury brands, his wife Pamela, and a couple introduced only as Stephen and Grace, whose exact connection to the group remained unclear. Sandra barely acknowledged me with a nod, before loudly introducing me to her friends as her former husband's son, making it sound like I was some obligation she had reluctantly inherited, rather than family. The group demanded our best table, which they were already standing beside, having displaced the couple who had been seated there minutes earlier. Jake had handled the move diplomatically, offering the affected customers complimentary desserts, but the evening was already off to a challenging start. The first red flag appeared when Thomas asked for the wine list and immediately scoffed at our selections. We pride ourselves on offering excellent but affordable local wines, but he demanded brands we simply did not carry. When our server explained our wine philosophy, Thomas dismissively asked if we had anything worth drinking. Sandra interjected that perhaps Leonard could make an exception and serve something special not on the menu. I politely explained that what they saw was what we offered, which earned me a cold glare from my stepmother. As I returned to the kitchen, Diana loudly commented on how charming it must be to run such a simple establishment, emphasizing the word simple in a way that made it sound like an insult. Madison followed me into the kitchen, her face flushed with irritation. She had already encountered resistance when presenting the specials with Pamela, interrupting her to ask if anything was actually edible. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that these were important contacts for the restaurant, regardless of their behavior. The group became increasingly disruptive as the evening progressed. They requested multiple substitutions for each dish, asked for ingredients we did not have, and sent back perfectly prepared food for arbitrary reasons. Thomas proclaimed our house specialty too bland, despite it being our most popular dish, while Jessica complained her fish was overcooked when it was exactly as described on the menu. The noise level from their table steadily increased, forcing other diners to lean in close just to hear their companions. A middle-aged couple celebrating their anniversary at a nearby table eventually requested their dessert to go, clearly uncomfortable with the atmosphere. As they left, the husband gave me an apologetic look as if he understood my predicament. By 8:30, the mood in the restaurant had shifted noticeably, with other guests casting annoyed glances toward Sandra's table. I felt sick watching my carefully cultivated dining experience being undermined by these people who seemed determined to find fault with everything. The situation deteriorated further when the group began ordering from nearly every section of the menu, claiming they wanted to taste everything to evaluate the restaurant properly. They picked at each dish, taking just a few bites, before declaring it unsatisfactory and pushing it aside. Thomas made a show of adding salt to everything without tasting it first, while Diana requested a lemon wedge for dishes that would be ruined by citrus. The waste was appalling, especially considering our commitment to sustainable, locally sourced ingredients. Sandra repeatedly called me out from the kitchen, insisting I personally present each course. Each time I was subjected to a barrage of critical comments disguised as helpful feedback. Thomas suggested my plating was amateur, while Robert questioned the authenticity of recipes passed down from my grandmother. Diana asked if I had ever considered getting professional training, implying my skills were substandard. Throughout it all, Sandra smiled with a satisfaction that made my blood boil. She was clearly enjoying my discomfort, as though my humiliation was the evening's true entertainment. During a brief moment back in the kitchen, I overheard Thomas mention something about location value and wasted potential. When I returned with another round of dishes, I caught the tail end of a conversation about real estate opportunities in this neighborhood. Thomas was gesturing around the restaurant, while Sandra nodded enthusiastically. A sick feeling settled in my stomach, as I began to suspect this dinner might have ulterior motives beyond simply tormenting me. As the meal progressed, their behavior grew more outrageous. Thomas ordered an expensive bottle of wine, took one sip, declared it vinegar, and poured it directly into his pasta to improve the flavor. Diana complained that the temperature in the restaurant was too warm, and demanded the air conditioning be turned higher, despite other guests being perfectly comfortable. When Madison politely suggested a wrap if she was cold, Diana looked at her as though she had suggested wearing a trash bag. By 10:30, well past our usual closing time, the rest of the restaurant had emptied. My staff was exhausted but stuck as Sandra's group showed no signs of leaving. They ordered more drinks despite showing clear signs of intoxication. Jake approached their table and gently explained that the bar would be closing. Thomas loudly proclaimed that rules were meant to be bent for the right people and tried to press a $100 bill into Jake's hand. To his credit, Jake politely declined and stood firm on our policy. The situation reached a breaking point when Thomas gesticulated wildly while talking and deliberately knocked over a full glass of red wine. The liquid spread across the white tablecloth and spilled onto Madison's uniform as she was clearing nearby plates. Instead of apologizing, Thomas accused her of bumping his arm and demanded she be more careful around important customers. I saw tears spring to Madison's eyes as she excused herself to change. That was when Sandra leaned over and placed her hand on my arm, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. She explained that Thomas had been very impressed with the location of my restaurant, if not the cuisine itself. She informed me that he was considering making me an offer to buy the property, suggesting it would be perfect for a new upscale cocktail lounge he was planning. Sandra added that she had told Thomas how much I was struggling financially information she had no right to share, and that this could be my way out of a failing business. I pulled my arm away, unable to hide my anger any longer. I informed her that Harvest Table was not failing nor for sale. Sandra laughed and told the table I had always been delusional about my capabilities. Thomas interjected that everyone had their price, and perhaps we could discuss numbers that would make me see reason. When I firmly declined the table, exchanged knowing looks as though my refusal was merely an opening gambit in a negotiation rather than a final answer. After nearly 4 hours of enduring their behavior, Jake approached me with the final bill. The total came to $2,850, reflecting the excessive amount of food and drink they had ordered and mostly wasted. I personally brought the check to the table, thanking them for their visit and expressing hope they had enjoyed their evening. The response was immediate and shocking. Sandra laughed and pushed the check back toward me. "This is a family dinner, Leonard. Surely you are not expecting us to pay." Thomas smiled condescendingly and added that perhaps we could consider this meal a business expense, part of his evaluation of the property. Diana chimed in that charging them would be poor form, considering the valuable exposure they could provide on social media, though she had spent most of the night criticizing everything about my restaurant. I stood my ground, explaining politely but firmly that while I valued their visit, the bill reflected services and products provided. Sandra's expression hardened as she leaned forward. "You owe me, Leonard. I let you live in your father's house for months after he died. I could have thrown you out immediately." Thomas interrupted, suggesting we discuss a deal he would consider purchasing the property for a generous amount, and we could forget about tonight's bill as a gesture of goodwill. Diana added that if I insisted on payment, she would be forced to share her dining experience online with her considerable following. "One-star reviews can destroy small restaurants like yours," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. The entire table looked at me expectantly, clearly, believing I would cave under their pressure. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my professionalism for subservience. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I thought about the years of condescension from Sandra, the way she had belittled my dreams and diminished my accomplishments. I thought about my staff who had endured hours of abuse from these people. I thought about my father who, despite his flaws, had taught me to stand up for myself. And I thought about my restaurant, the physical manifestation of everything I had worked for, everything I believed in. Sandra must have sensed my internal resolution. She revealed that she had promised her friends a free meal at my expense to impress them. She reminded me that I lived in my father's house, conveniently forgetting that it had been my childhood home too. She claimed I owed her loyalty after everything she had done for me, though I struggled to identify a single act of genuine kindness from her in all the years I had known her. Memories flooded back of the days following my father's funeral. Sandra had changed the locks on our family home while I was arranging the service. She had thrown away family photographs and heirlooms that she deemed worthless. She had treated me like an intruder in my own grief. The realization crystallized that Sandra and her friends had never seen me as an equal. To them, I was just a stepping stone, a means to an end. My restaurant was not a dream realized, but a piece of real estate to be acquired, a location to be exploited. With perfect clarity, I understood that continuing to accommodate them would only invite more abuse. I remembered the security cameras we had installed after a break-in last year. Every moment of their behavior had been recorded. Every insulting comment, every deliberate act of waste, every manipulative move was documented. With calm, I did not entirely feel I asked once more if they intended to pay their bill. When they responded with more laughter and threats, I nodded and excused myself. I went to the office, checked that our security footage was clear, and called the police. I reported an incident of defrauding an innkeeper, explaining that a large party was refusing to pay a substantial bill. When I returned to the dining room, I informed the group that they had 15 minutes to resolve the bill before the authorities arrived. The reaction was immediate. Sandra's face flushed with anger as she accused me of bluffing. Thomas stood up using his height to try to intimidate me, warning that I was making a powerful enemy. Diana began gathering her things, suddenly claiming she had never intended not to pay merely to discuss a discount for alleged poor service. The others looked uncomfortable, glancing between Thomas and the door, as though weighing their options. Sandra hissed that I was betraying family, to which I calmly replied that family does not exploit or humiliate one another. I reminded her that every interaction had been recorded on our security system, including their explicit refusal to pay and subsequent threats. The mention of video evidence caused a visible shift in the group's demeanor. Thomas checked his watch and declared they did not have time for this nonsense, but made no move toward settling the bill. When 2 police officers arrived 10 minutes later, the situation escalated in ways I could never have anticipated. The officers were professional and direct, explaining that refusing to pay for restaurant services was a criminal offense. They requested identification from everyone at the table, while I provided them with the bill details and access to our security footage. Thomas immediately became belligerent, demanding to speak with the officer's supervisor, and dropping names of city officials he claimed to know personally. As the officers reviewed our security video on the restaurant's office computer, one of them suddenly straightened, looking more closely at Thomas' face. He excused himself to make a call, returning minutes later with a changed demeanor. After a quiet consultation with his partner, the officer asked Thomas to step aside for further questions. It emerged that Thomas was not just the successful businessman he portrayed himself to be. He was currently under investigation for real estate fraud in a neighboring county, having convinced several small business owners to sell their properties at below market value, based on falsified documents about zoning changes. While this revelation was processing, the second officer noticed Diana attempting to discreetly place something in her purse. When asked to open her bag, she reluctantly complied. Inside was an ornate salt cellar from our table, along with 2 cloth napkins and a small silver spoon. More surprisingly, the officer also found several pieces of jewelry with price tags still attached, items Diana claimed to have purchased earlier that day, but for which she could produce no receipt. A quick call confirmed that these items matched the description of merchandise reported stolen from a boutique restaurant and shop across town earlier that week. What had begun as a case of dining and dashing had unexpectedly uncovered connections to much more serious crimes. As Thomas and Diana were separated for further questioning, the remaining members of the party suddenly became very cooperative, quickly producing credit cards to split the remaining bill. After the police escorted Thomas and Diana away for further questioning, The remaining guests paid their portions and departed hurriedly, avoiding eye contact and leaving without a word. Sandra remained abandoned by her friends and faced with a portion of the bill she could not cover. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the insecurity beneath her arrogance. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed genuinely vulnerable. I considered leaving her to figure out her own solution, a fitting response to years of dismissal and contempt. But something in me could not take satisfaction in her humiliation, even after all she had done. I paid her portion of the bill and called her a taxi, making it clear that this was the last time I would bail her out and that she was not welcome in my restaurant again. She left without thanking me, but the defeat in her posture said everything her pride would not allow her to verbalize. After everyone had gone, my team stayed behind to clean up the considerable mess left behind. Madison revealed that she had taken additional video on her phone throughout the evening as a precaution, capturing some of the worst behavior that the security cameras might have missed. Carlos and Jake expressed their admiration for how I had handled the situation, standing firm without lowering myself to the group's level of behavior. Their loyalty moved me deeply, reinforcing that I had built not just a business, but a true team. That night, exhausted, but oddly liberated, I sat alone in my empty restaurant and felt something shift within me. The burden of seeking Sandra's approval, of somehow proving my worth to her, had finally lifted. I realized I had been carrying that weight since my father's death, perhaps even before. By standing up to her and her friends, I had broken a pattern that had shaped our relationship for years. Though physically tired, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. The following days brought unexpected developments. Word of the incident spread through the local restaurant community, and I received messages from several other establishment owners who had experienced similar problems with Thomas Diana and their crowd. It seemed they had made a habit of intimidating small business owners, leveraging their perceived status to obtain free goods and services. Several owners thanked me for taking action, when others had simply absorbed the loss to avoid confrontation. Customer support increased noticeably, with reservations climbing as people came in specifically to show solidarity. Many expressed that they appreciated a business owner who stood up for his staff and values. Our online reviews improved, with several regular customers posting positive comments to counter any potential negative fallout. The restaurant had never been busier, and for the first time we had to start a waiting list for weekend reservations. A week after the incident, Sandra called. Her voice lacked its usual imperious tone as she offered a stiff apology. She admitted that she had been trying to impress Thomas and his circle people, who had seemed to offer her the status and security she craved. Now she found herself excluded from their social events, deemed a liability after the restaurant debacle. Her attempt to use my business for social climbing had backfired spectacularly. She suggested meeting for coffee to clear the air, framing it as an opportunity to rebuild our relationship. I declined politely, but firmly. While I no longer harbored active resentment, I recognized that some relationships cannot and should not be salvaged. I wished her well, but maintained the boundary I had finally established. Our conversation was brief but civil, and when it ended, I felt a sense of closure rather than regret. Over the following months, Harvest Table continued to thrive. With our improved financial situation, I was able to hire additional staff, reducing the grueling hours my core team had been working. I implemented a training program for young aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, creating a pathway similar to the one I had wished for in my early career. Jake, Madison, and Carlos accepted my offer to become junior partners in the business, formalizing the stake they had earned through their dedication and hard work. The experience taught me valuable lessons about setting boundaries and standing up for myself and those I care about. I realized that I had spent years seeking validation from people who were incapable of providing it, measuring my worth against standards that were never fair or relevant to my goals. Success, I discovered, is not defined by impressing those who look down on you, but by creating something authentic that reflects your values and serves your community. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes you have to face those who have hurt you to truly free yourself from their influence. By confronting Sandra and refusing to accept her treatment, I released myself from patterns established years ago. The relationship may not have been saved, but I saved something more important: my sense of self-worth and dignity. Today, Harvest Table stands as a testament to persistence and integrity. We have maintained our commitment to local sourcing and sustainability, while expanding our community involvement. The restaurant has become known not just for its food but for its atmosphere of mutual respect between staff, management, and customers. What Sandra and her friends failed to understand is that true value comes from building something meaningful, not from appearances or social positioning. Looking back at that unforgettable evening, I can almost feel grateful for the challenge it presented. Without that confrontation, I might have continued seeking approval from people who would never give it, allowing past wounds to dictate my present choices. Instead, I found the courage to stand firm in my convictions and the wisdom to recognize my true allies. Sometimes the most unexpected situations become our most powerful teachers. I want to thank you for listening to my story today. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated or mistreated you? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one and would love to hear from you. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of perseverance and personal growth. Remember, sometimes the most difficult confrontations lead to the most meaningful transformations. Until next time, take care and be good to yourselves and others.